So again, I'm Mathew Beane, Magento Master, Magento Certified Developer. I work for a company called RoboFirm, and you may recognize me from my picture here. I don't look like this in real life. Basically, I run DevOps at RoboFirm, and have been a Linux guy since the mid-90s and a Magento developer since late 2000s. Today's plan, we're going to go over the foundations of what DevOps is and what it really means, sort of from a philosophical sort of point of view instead of a technical point of view. Then we're going to get into how this actually applies to your team that you work with, discussing sort of the culture of processes and technologies that go into DevOps. And then we'll move on to giving you some building blocks to work with. Hopefully you'll be able to go home and do what I'm doing. I'm sorry. And then create a blueprint for you so that you can actually, action on those building blocks. So let's just kick this off and get right into dealing with the foundations of DevOps, essentially. So what is DevOps? DevOps is the practice of operations and development, engineering participating together in the entire service lifecycle, from design through development processes to the production support. So that means really DevOps is everything, which is kind of hard because really typically what you had was operations sitting in its own little bubble and then everything else working toward that bubble, but there was never anything proceeding back from operations into development, essentially. It was a one-way path. And DevOps tries to bridge this. So the goals of DevOps are pretty simple. You want to be able to release on demand. Well, anytime you want, 12 times a day, 100 times a day, it's fine. Release as often as you want. Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., you want to be comfortable doing that. Prepare technology and processes to actually support this. Treat your infrastructure as code. This is actually one of the key concepts that most people think of as DevOps, but really is only a small portion of it. You want to eliminate all of your technical debt. Going without automation and so on creates technical debt as you go on. And engaging in automation and so on will relieve you of that. You want to fail often and well, basically. It's completely backwards of a normal operation cycle. And in fact, it's really interesting because Netflix actually designed a whole series of software called this Symbian Army that basically goes out and causes servers to break. It causes clusters to drop. It breaks your connections to Netflix so that they can actually make it better. So I'm not kidding when I say fail without fear. I mean, you actually want to fail. You want to measure and document everything, and then you want to be able to provide a feedback loop so that this actually continues to grow and build on itself. So the easiest way to look at this is actually a term called CAMS, which was coined by John Willis back in 2010. He's one of the DevOps sort of, pioneers. And basically it's a feedback loop which you can create by building your culture out and building automation on top of that, using monitoring to actually create the feedback loop and then sharing that and documenting it. Patrick Dubois, who's one of the he's the one who came up with the term DevOps even. He basically said that there's an increase in feedback loops between business, all parts of the delivery process and operation. Thanks to the feedback loops, we can increase the quality and speed up the flow. Sort of long words, but nonetheless, you need a culture to start off with. People and processes first. Culture isn't just people in this case. We're talking about technologies and processes and so on. If you don't have a culture, anything else you do after that, automating, monitoring, it's all going to fail. And basically, it's impossible to automate or measure without the culture in place. Magento actually has a very strong DevOps meta culture already that you can tap into. There are many people who discuss it on a daily basis on Twitter and the other forums. And basically, you want to build your culture first. Then you move on to automation. Automation is basically the process of stitching together all of the fabric of tools that you have and allowing for, the provisioning, release management, configuration management, all of these things. And I'll go into detail more about some of these in a little bit. But basically, automation is your fabric of DevOps. When you look at it, that's what you're stitching together. The benefits of this are that you reduce your human effort through automation and you increase the feedback, basically, loop by automating. It's not that it removes the bugs, it's just easier to find them, essentially. And after you've automated it, it's really easy to apply that automation to the next project or next task you're doing, actually. And the biggest thing that automation does is it eliminates the truck factor. Truck factor means that basically if I get hit by a truck, everything I know is gone. And if I'm the only one who knows it, all of that is gone forever. So automation allows us to actually build out the truck factor into a non-human component that can't get hit by a truck. Next, you have measurement. If you can't measure, you can't improve, right? A successful DevOps implementation will measure everything as often as it can. And basically, you want every metric you can get. Performance, process, people metrics, whatever. Get it all together into one spot and utilize the tools you can to aggregate this and actually start pulling out the stuff that you want to share, essentially. Last in the CAM cycle, sharing. Sharing is your loop back in which you actually create more culture. You start with a culture, but you really need to continue to build that culture. So that's really the high-level version of DevOps. That's the philosophy right there. You really want to be able to build a training program for your employees or clients or whoever so that they understand that they're part of the DevOps cycle. It is all inclusive. Every single person that works at your company is in DevOps. So let's talk about the team, right? Team DevOps. We'll discuss the processes and technology and look at the people that are involved. So the first place to look at DevOps, essentially, is, how does this look? Oh, look at that. You can actually see it well. All right. So each DevOps role has people and processes and technologies that support them. And so in this case, we have, usually, this is your closed loop. That's your operations. You know, everything goes into that, and nobody ever thinks about the customers as part of a DevOps cycle. But your customers are the ones using your software. So you really want their feedback. That's where your real culture is sitting. Everything you do supports them buying things on your store. So why wouldn't you want their feedback in your culture? And it really, you know, I put DevOps here in the middle, and this is all based on a graph by Patrick Dubois, actually. If you go on his website, which is jedi.be, he has an incredible amount of information about DevOps. And I really appreciate all the work he's done to support what I do. And so this is based on one of his graphs, and it goes into very deep detail about each of the connections you see here. But today we're a little limited on time, so we're not going to go into it. The individual roles you find within DevOps. You've got your automation architects, your release managers, your security people, you know, your quality assurance, your peer review people. And my favorite, which I wish my job title was, is the disruptive technology research technician. This is the guy who comes up with a new software and says, hey, we should be using this. And really can disrupt the entire process. Just turn it on its head and like make it even better. So DevOps functions best when the roles are actually transparent. The role groups are just examples, and they really are more like potential boundaries than actual boundaries. And integrating DevOps really into your existing processes, you'll find that, you know, you're going to already have roles. So you're going to want to try to figure out how to fit them into the pieces that you have already. Key players give you the insight in how things work together. So the roles are your way to actually see who you're going to affect and what their new job will be after you've disrupted them. You got business and operations. So each of these are sort of, if we go back to the graph here, oh, what did I do? Oh, hit the wrong button. Come on, give me 1 second. Put those buttons too close together. So I'm going through each of these sections here. We talked about, you know, the development, the center section here. Let's talk a little bit about the business. So business and operations. These are your salespeople, your support, your administration, and so on. You know, really, you have a lot of people on business and operations that are not traditionally thought of as DevOps. However, these are the people that actually know more about everything you're doing than you do. And it's also your hardware, your infrastructure, your hosting company, your partners. Everybody is part of this operational cycle. And if you leave it out on its own in a closed loop, you will not be able to build your culture off of it. This includes like even your fellow agencies, Magento themselves. Everybody is part of this business and operations. Again, these are potential boundaries. They aren't real boundaries. And you really want to break down the boundaries when it comes to DevOps. So we've got development and engineering. This is dev, right? They typically don't care what happens in operations, right? That is what DevOps changes. You make everybody responsible for the things they do so that they can actually fix them and learn from them and get better at what they do. This isn't just the people who write the code and test it. It's also the tools you use, PHP Storm, Zen Studio, whatever. It's also Git and things of that nature. How are you actually deploying? May even include what Agile and Scrum and so on. It's really the processes that are important to DevOps more than the people in some ways, because unfortunately people are replaceable, even myself. Testing and monitoring, again, thought of usually separate from DevOps, but really it's really important to DevOps because your daily monitoring that happens in operations turns up your errors. You deploy some code, error rate spikes. Hey, this should really trigger a whole process inside your company. You have things to test such as JMeter, Gatling, Selenium for the front end, functional and regression testing on code. Monitoring can turn up a lot of things that tests miss. Tests are pretty hard to actually get full coverage on, depending on what you're using software-wise. But with Magento 1, testing is very limited and a lot of work. So monitoring really fills that gap, and things like syslogd, SNMP, New Relic, etc., AWS CloudWatch, all of these really become your binoculars to see what your code or your process change caused. Then you have your customers and your end users. These are, in my opinion, the most important aspect of what we do, because your customers buy things, which drives your revenue cycle. These are the users of the store, but they also are the admins. Your admins are adding products. They're changing things all of the time. If you can't get feedback out of that process and don't know what they're doing, you'll never be able to improve that process. They shouldn't clear the index at this point. They shouldn't do whatever. Like, that has to be part of the DevOps cycle. DevOps brings all separate groups together and acts like a hub and fills the gaps that exist within our processes. So that's it for the philosophy part of this talk. We're going to move on to talking more technical about the pieces and how you can put them together now. This graph is really complex and organic looking, but honestly, this whole process is complex and organic in itself. And this really describes what happens at RoboFirm on a daily basis. We have endeavored to make our entire process revolve around this graph. And what you have here is, at the center, you have your Jira tickets, your Bitbucket, your development. This gets pushed out by Bamboo or any other continuous integration tool that you want to use. We use Bamboo. We've used several others as well. And basically, Bamboo needs to be able to run your continuous integration tools, which in our case, we're using Composer, N98, and some internal tools that we've designed to handle like the tasks that happen when you're actually pushing out code, or pushing database back from production into your testing environments, etc. So that's that area there. Here you have your deploy, which includes testing. So you want to make sure you're testing. Testing helps a lot. You might not have full coverage, but run what you can. And then basically you have iterative branching happening for releases. And these get pushed out into development environments for our developers. Those are typically VMs. And I've put most of the hardware stuff over on this side here. And then we have our testing environments. These are all automated. We don't ever touch them. It just gets pushed out into the testing environments, and nobody even has shell access. They're even immutable. We can throw them out and re-kick them entirely. And it's all scripted. You have your staging environments. These are where your production data lives before it becomes production. And these are actually more unusual than people like to make them out to be. They require a lot of extra effort, and typically this plays out in story points for the clients. Staging environments are a task. And then you have your production environments. All of these feed stats into our monitoring stats, even our development environments. We actually see when our developers make mistakes on their local devs in our Elk stack, which is pretty cool. And then on the hardware side, you have this area over here, and basically EC2 instances have block storage. We started using EFS, and EFS is fantastic for all of the media and shared files. Not so great for code. It's only, it really just isn't fast enough, about 100 megabit per second, which is about a third of the speed of a normal drive. So you really cannot run code off of EFS, as far as I can see. And then you also have, I mean, we use Amazon a lot at this point. We also have on Google Cloud, we have it sort of built out, but we decided against it for the time being. And for our development environments, we actually use something very similar, but on a VM, and building out some of the components inside of Docker containers. So you end up with the same infrastructure, but in a different context. And now these slides will be shared, and I'm more than happy to talk about the individual components. I realize this graph is a little over the top, but I love it. So, an example setup of a development environment. Our devs basically work on VMs, and those run on their Mac or their PC or whatever they want to use. We don't care. These basically contain all of the code on their local hard drive and then push the code into the container so that Nginx can pick it up. They're working off a branching cycle, the same as everything else. They pull a feature branch, which is based on a Jira ticket. They work through their ticket. They make a pull request. This gets peer reviewed. Maybe there's some fixes. And then eventually it gets merged into a release branch, which automatically shows up on our testing environment, which looks something like this. And the difference is really, if you look here, this is a VMware-based environment, and this one is an AWS-based environment. Again, we try to really mirror them, although we found that you can't do it exactly because the developers oftentimes are on different OSs and have different requirements, and that's why we decided to Dockerize a lot of the service level stuff because it's easier for us to control via, we use Terraform and Puppet to basically kick the configurations. Developers never have to think about it. They just run a command and it does it. And with the testing, again, automatically Bamboo just pushes the release branches out. You have like release 101 or release 102 or whatever, and those automatically show up and are able to be hit individually. So each testing environment actually has however many release branches you want on it. And all of this is backed by AWS services and stood up via Terraform and Puppet. We chose Puppet. We looked at Ansible, Salt, and the rest, and honestly, I think they're all about the same. Some have different problems, but they all have problems, and some have different solutions, but they all have solutions. So it's really a personal choice. And what made it the difference for us was Puppet support. The Puppet enterprise support is fantastic. They are very fast and tangible. And that was important to us. We like to have overlapping layers of support for our software. So treating your infrastructure and configuration as code is one of the key concepts. You really want to look at configuration for your application separate from your infrastructure configuration. And things like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, Salt, and so on can all contain the configurations for your application, but you're much better off keeping those out of your application and keeping those in your CI/CD tools. Let's see. Local machines, we use Vagrant for some of them for the stand-up. There's we basically make golden VMs out of Vagrant, and those have all of the stack for the for containers and the Nginx proxy and all that other stuff. And we use a series of simple shell scripts that we've written to support a lot of the application layer configuration instead of counting on Puppet or Chef or whatever. AWS Stack is a pretty simplified version of it. It doesn't contain more than a single EC2 instance, so you have to use your imagination a little, but this gives you a good feel for how everything's put together. You have EC2 containers, which are your boxes. You have RDS, which is your relational database. You have Elastic Cache, which is Redis or Memcache. S3 buckets containing scalable object-based storage. So the best part about that is for auto-scaling, you need to push your release somewhere so that boxes that come up can actually pull from that. That's probably the best place that we're using S3 at this point, the best example of it. Although we also use it for dumping production databases, scrubbed ones into our environment and so on. And it's a very intricate part of the overall process. Without the S3 buckets, nothing happens. Initially, we set up an S3 bucket with all of the database and code, and that actually gets built by the scripts. So the S3 bucket is the first thing that actually gets populated when we stand up a site. This is Fabrizio Branca's graph. He was kind enough to let me use it. And this this is further down the road than I'm at. And this is like a fully engaged DevOps stack here. They are using Lambda to be able to force in log files from their different release branches. They actually have it so that their servers are all immutable, so that when they release a production server, they stand up a whole new production server and do tests, and all of this goes into Grafana so they can see it. And then when it's time to actually release the production, they can just swap between the old boxes and the new boxes, etc. And like basically Fabrizio says it best, and like if you want to sound cool, just stick continuous in front of it. It works. And so the next couple slides, you'll notice I've stuck continuous on every one of them. Continuous integration and delivery tools. So this is your automated build, deploy, test, and release. CI/CD tools that have worked well for us with Magento. Amazon Code Pipeline should not be on this list. A little oversight there. Pain in the butt. But that's okay. Maybe somebody else figured it out. And maybe I'm wrong. Bamboo, that's what we use. We love Bamboo. We're using Bamboo pipelines now, and it's fantastic. They're about to get rid of Bamboo Cloud entirely. Jenkins, we've used this in the past. Travis CI, we've also used this. We like them a lot. We settled on Bamboo because of the Atlassian stack. And I said it earlier, but actually I was quoting Martin Fowler, who is one of the DevOps engineers who really started the whole DevOps movement. And he said that continuous integration doesn't get rid of the bugs, but it does make them dramatically easier to find and remove. And you can see here that basically developers working on tickets creates a build, which creates a release, which creates a deploy, which creates a test. All of this automated so that at any point in that process, you will find your errors. Again, monitoring is the key to this so that you're creating your feedback loop. Continuous testing. Hey, it sounds cool, right? Testing is a broad subject, deserves a lot more attention than I can give it here. The most important parts is, in my opinion, is Magento 2. They put a lot of effort into testing, and it's much easier to build tests in Magento 2 than it ever was in Magento 1. It is totally possible to build with Magento 1. Magium lib can be utilized to do Selenium tests. There's unit tests via ecomdev's PHP unit, and so on. And I mean, it's worth the effort. Continuous monitoring. So we were using Nachos. Most people will call it Nagios, but it's actually called Nachos. I swear to you. I remember when they changed the name from NetSaint. I actually remember it. And they're like, nope, it's Nachos. Nagios basically sucks in SNMP, I always get those mixed up, and builds alerts, basically. It's a really good package, a good way to get started with monitoring, pretty easy to pull stats in. However, we moved on to using Datadog. Datadog allows me to pull in an incredible amount of stats. I can aggregate New Relic against AWS CloudWatch versus anything I want. It even goes down and has an agent that runs on the server so that you can pull things like the Nginx status page, the PHP FPM status page, and build graphs and so on out of these. It can push stuff out as well. So it's not just inputs, it also pushes it into Slack. So on Slack, we have a bot that sits there and tells us when servers go bad. We've made it look like Robo even. That's our mascot. And he actually tells us when things go wrong. He's like, I'm seeing a bunch of errors. It looks like you humans messed something up. And like when it gets better, he's like, all right, humans, way to go. And everybody loves it. It's great. ChatOps is really cool because basically you get people involved in real time. VictorOps and PagerDuty, we've used both of these for paging ourselves when things go wrong, and it works really good. So nobody wants to sit on PagerDuty 24/7, 365. These tools allow you to basically spread this out across your team and basically make a tiered support type of situation. This should say continuous metrics. I don't know what I did wrong there. New Relic. Best tool like ever. Until other tools came along. But New Relic is amazing. And they've got a platform coming out called Meatballs that basically is going to kill Datadog for me. So I'm going to redo everything I did in Datadog and Meatballs here in a little while. Because basically they tied everything together. New Relic gives you real-time insight into your performance across your infrastructure and application. It collects an amazing amount of data, and Magento even has released several New Relic extensions, and they're working very closely with New Relic to provide in-application statistics. So you can see the number of orders per hour, number of customers logged in, all those stats, and time into your graphs. Logs, continuous logs. Constant fragmentation of infrastructure, you end up with an immense amount of log files. You'll need something to deal with it. We use Elk. We actually use Elk from a provider called logs.io with a Z. They're fantastic, a great way to get started with the Elk stack. We set it up ourselves as well, but we had some trouble with scaling it to the amount that we're using it. And it's pretty inexpensive comparatively to the effort we are putting in, which is why we went with them. Infrastructure metrics, business metrics, events, error logs, etc. They all go into logs.io, and again, we aggregate those across everything. It's all about finding ways to build that culture and get it back into the culture so people can find the stats and see pretty graphs and go, oh, that's what happens when I do this. So let's look at a blueprint real quick. We don't have much time. The DevOps plan. Define, document, and empower your DevOps culture. Basically, you need to identify and document the processes you already have. Find the people that you have in their roles and actually document those as well. Focus on building that foundation so you know where your interstitial spaces that you need to fill are. You start automating this. You build application build processes. Typically, what I've seen people do is build on their dev boxes first. Nobody wants to start in production, so just build out your dev process. Make it easier for your developers to work. Who cares about the customers, right? Once you get that down, move on to your user acceptance testing environments. Suddenly, you've got two things going. Now you can have automated testing. Things are so easy for your developers to move through. Your peer reviews, great. And then when you get to your production environments, all of those lessons learned will allow you to actually build it out very quickly. You want to use simple, small building blocks, basically. You start with your Git workflow. You figure out how your application build process works. You figure out how you're dealing with your testing and review process. You automate your production deployments. And then you use operations and monitoring to plan the next release. This is basically agile for all of your processes. That's actually what DevOps is. And if you want to get more insight really into how Magento works really closely with DevOps, there's a presentation by Fabrizio called Rock Solid Magento Development, where he literally will tell you how to build this for yourself. This is very high level, and that's all the time we had today. But check out Fabrizio's work. He does an incredible amount of work on this. You want to keep it simple. With so many choices and technology and so on, it's important to focus on the small things that actually fit within your existing infrastructure and processes so that it's easy to implement and maintain. Without that, you're going to struggle and so on. The biggest DevOps downside is that it's like a Pandora's box. There is an endless amount of solutions for you out there. Start small, work through the processes, piece at a time, and eventually you'll have your fabric built. It's like being a weaver on the computer,